welcome to the last forum of fall semester. It's been a really great semester, and we hope you all have good finals and critique studios and breaks. Before we do anything else, we are going to welcome our fantastic introducers, Anna Jade and James McGuire, who will introduce our grand finale, Joseph Salvatore.
Last reading of the semester, so let's be loud as we welcome those two lovely introducers.
Good. Before we begin, I have to point out that it appears that Mr. Salvatore and Mr. Lopez seem to have the same hairstyle.
Actually, James, all of the men who have come to Forum this semester have had the same hairstyle. It was a happy accident.
We curated with that in mind.
All right. Joseph Salvatore's writing has appeared in such publications as Post Road, Salt Hill, New York Tyrant, Open City, Sleeping Fish, and Epiphany magazine, to name a few. To Assume a Pleasing Shape was published by BOA Editions in 2011. He is also the books editor of the Brooklyn Rail and a frequent contributor to the New York Times Book Review. As an assistant professor of writing and literature at the New School, he has won the As an assistant professor of writing and literature at the New School, he has won the university's award for teaching excellence. It is also where he founded the prestigious literary journal, Lit. In his book reviews for the New York Times, Salvatore presents a refreshingly unpretentious attitude towards storytelling. He treats the pulp vampire novel, The 12, with as much seriousness and introspection as he applies when considering mythological archetypes in Kate Bernheimer's 50 New Myths. His reviews do not contain pre-designated ideas about what a book should be. And as fellow student Benjamin Corbett puts it, Salvatore shows how to keep the reader interested, not only in the book in question, but in the criticism itself.
In his own collection, To Assume a Pleasing Shape, Salvatore combines a baroque, relentless narrative style with an almost theatrical awareness of audience. His fiction, as Emery Harkins puts it, consumes the readers in the same way his own characters are consumed. The book's title, a reference to the line from Hamlet, "The devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape," is perhaps a message to the reader. Beneath the technical expertise of the language lives the despairing, desperate complexity of his people's interior lives. The characters are a diverse and often marginalized cast: an academic with cripplingly large breasts, a goth teenager, nameless survivors of a mysterious disaster, a murdered woman. By making their thought processes visible, he allows for their humanity to emerge out of moments of internal neurosis rather than explicit conflict. The result is something strikingly human, a messy web of impressions and ideas, eerily analogous to the human mind. Please join us in welcoming Joseph Salvatore.
I was not prepared for such a lovely introduction, for real. I've had to write many myself, and I know how hard they are, and thank you, really, truly. And thanks as well to all of you for coming. It's a shitty day, and I appreciate you coming out on it so early. Obviously, I should thank my friend Gina Zucker, and my new friend Shelley, and my old pal Rob Lopez for helping me navigate this whole process of getting here today. So grateful to them, grateful to Pratt, really happy to be here, and incredibly humbled to be the grand finale of this incredible series. What to say? So I'm going to read two short pieces, one from the collection and a new piece that just came out in a magazine called Epiphany. So something old, something new. And then I'm more than happy to take questions or chat with you, however you'd like to do it. This is Late Thought. Who thinks these things as you eat a peanut butter sandwich and your wife is lacing up her Nikes in the kitchen and warning you to go slow with the bread and asking you to stay put because she has a job for you? In about 1 second, you're going to hold her left ankle and lift it incrementally as she lets unstiffen her hamstring and breathes deeply and bunches her brow and puts all her weight in your hands and says she's going to take advantage of her day off and greater advantage still of the weather, because no one's going to be running in the park on a day like this, overcast and cold and 2 days before Thanksgiving. No strollers, no bikes, and won't she be thus utterly allowed to give herself over to it, let herself go, run without thought as she did as a girl on the beaches of Cape Cod, that place she took you to after only 2 months of dating to meet her family, because she said without any sentimentality at all, because that is not her style, just said it like she might be giving someone the time, that she wants you to meet her father before he dies. Because he's dying, she told you, and then never mentioned it again. And she drives you in another November from New York to Massachusetts in her old white Subaru with no working heat, and you play the only cassette tape she has in the car, which is the B-52 Cosmic Thing. And you thrill at the slate gray planks of water, miles it seems below you, as you cross the Sagamore Bridge and then continue down Old Route 6, past houses with unpainted clapboards and scrub brush and white pine, until she takes some turns and then some more, and then swings the Subaru into a driveway made of beach sand, and parks in front of an open, empty garage, but not inside the garage, and a big, rusty blonde dog comes ambling out of the house, and although strange dogs scare you, you nonetheless put your hand out for sniff inspection. And your soon-to-be, though you don't know it yet, wife drops to her knees and lets go her backpack and puts her mittened hands out and says, "Rexford, come here, Rexford." And a woman with short, neatly combed white hair comes onto the porch wearing a faded denim shirt over a dark turtleneck and says to you, "Well, hello there." And to your girlfriend says, "If you want to park in the garage, that's fine because Roberta's left for the day." And you shake hands with the white-haired woman who tells you to call her Ellen. And then you turn, and then around your legs and into the house runs the dog before you even make it to the steps. And inside, on a couch, under a patch quilt and comforter, is a man with no hair and breathtakingly thin, and his name is Mike, and Mike doesn't stand to shake hands, but does nonetheless offer you his hand to shake. And his hand feels dry and cool and hollow as a bird that is bumpy with calluses. And later after dinner, when your future wife and her mother are washing dishes, he says to you something that could, if you allowed it to, sound to your graduate school ears like something worthy of critical ridicule, but that, upon later reflection, under the circumstances, sounds to you not merely non-sentimental, but utterly heroic, life-affirming, real, is delivered, in fact, as if you were just giving someone the time. He says, "My daughter likes you, and I may not get to see you get married, but she likes you, and so what the hell I'll say to you. If you should end up with her, please take good care of her." I'm supposed to say that, right? Well, you probably already picked up on this, but she's a tough girl. Believe me, I know she won't always let you know what she's thinking, and she'll keep you out of her life sometimes when you don't understand why she feels she couldn't trust someone who loves her as much as you do. Believe me, I know. Take it from me, he says, she's a tough one. But she's an honest girl. Once saw her from a doorway when she never knew I was watching, stand on her bare toes trying to reach a book off a shelf and knock over one of them boats in a bottle that my father had made me. He had dozens of those pieces of shit. Anyway, it hit the side of the dresser and scattered in shards around her bare feet. And I stepped back quick, knowing she'd hate that I'd seen her, but she didn't see me, and so I figured I'd better keep my mouth shut. Just crept down the stairs and headed out to check my lobster traps because I didn't want any trouble from that girl. Nope. Learned my lesson early. And listen to me here. One wrong move, one wagged finger with that one, and she'll be silent for days. Better to keep the peace and rail about an old bottle, I figured. But then later that night, Ellen told me that our girl had been brooding all day, quiet and sludgy, kind of food fickle. Passed up a hoodsy cup her mother offered her. But then finally, before bed, had confided in her mother that she'd broken the boat in the bottle that Grandpa had given Daddy, and that on her own, she'd cleaned up the floor and saved all the pieces in a brown paper bag. And then she lifted her bare feet, and my wife saw what some of that brooding had been about, and told our daughter to stay put while she fetched the Mercure comb. And Ah, hell, I got a million stories about how she's made me proud. That I was saving for someday to tell her, like maybe on her wedding day, but that's what we're supposed to do, right? Fathers and daughters. But I guess that is the way life finally does go. I'm sure I'm not telling you nothing new, nothing you don't already think about, but it's worth repeating, I think. You better do some things while you are still able, because one day you might not have that chance again. And that was all Mike had wanted to say to you. And that night, Mike and Ellen let you and their daughter sleep premaritally in her old bedroom. And when, in the dark, her back in your belly, you told her the story that Mike had told you, you felt her face and it was wet. And the next morning you woke alone, and downstairs, Ellen was sitting with Mike and a woman dressed in white who said her name was Roberta. And Ellen said that daughter had gone for a run on the beach and that you should pour yourself a cup of coffee in the kitchen. And by the time her cup was full, the back door swung open and in with the cold air she came, pulling off hat and mittens, and said, God, how good that felt. Had the beach all to herself. And 2 days later, you were back in Brooklyn, and sometimes you would look out the window of your apartment out onto North 3rd Street, thinking about how he lived long enough to know she was engaged to be married to you, but not long enough to see her get married, and how his voice was hard to hear, and he didn't say much over the phone when you called to ask his permission. And okay, maybe that was too schmaltzy, and maybe you rushed things a bit because of the talk you and Mike had had, but you never cared or believed you made the wrong decision because she was a tough girl, and she told the truth, and maybe she hid herself away sometimes, but she always came back, except from the park. Because who thinks these things, that while your wife is lacing up her Nikes and you're eating a sandwich made from the bread you were supposed to use for the stuffing for a turkey that will sit in your freezer frozen for 7 months, until you finally throw it out because you couldn't until now, because it was she who had touched it last, she who had brought it home a week before her run and cleared out the freezer shelf and pushed the frozen bird in. And who thinks these things while all this is happening? A man who was a state and a river away, and who has driven many times through and has studied the landscape of the same park your wife will jog through that very afternoon, will also take advantage of the day when the visibility is low and the chance of many people being in the park slim. And who thinks these things, that this man would use a nylon rope that could so easily be traced back to a Home Depot in New Jersey, and that he would, with that nylon rope, make your wife to lie cold in the dirt at the bottom of a slope by the side of the path where no one would find her until after midnight. In fact, not a no one, but a dog. A dog would find her running shorts first and the rest of her later. And who thinks these things, that her legs that you had helped stretch just hours before would be cold to the touch, and so would the feet. And who thinks about these things so much, about if her white and purple running sneakers were on or off those feet? And who thinks these things, that this man from across the river would feel convinced that he had studied everything as well as he could, thought of all possible outcomes, but that he would never know that the person he had selected had once, long ago, in a room where you could always smell the sea, broken a bottle with a boat in it, and that those glass shards, when her father had turned his back, cut their way into her bare feet. And who thinks these things, that those small scars that you had touched and traced and kissed might have gleamed for just a moment in the beam of a searching flashlight? Who thinks these things, you wonder, staring out onto North 3rd Street? Who would think such things? And for how much longer? That is late thought.
That last piece you just read, I don't remember if you explained the entire history behind it, but what is the history behind that? Like, do you have a religious background?
That kind of history, okay. I mean, I was talking about how it came to be. That kind of question. Yeah, I do to some extent. My grandmother on my father's side was an orphan and was raised in a convent. And so when I used to visit her, there's a lot of religious iconography, much of which I still own, which is just incredibly lurid, gothic, beautiful, strange stuff. And you know, as a young kid, I went to Mass a lot, which in the Catholic tradition is fairly gruesome and gory. And, you know, I remember, and I went to parochial school, so I certainly remember there were these monthly missalettes we used to get, and they would have stories of saints. There'd be a saint, and then there'd be like a meditation and a prayer notice. And the saints would always have these incredibly gruesome stories about how they earned their sainthood. I remember this one about a woman who she was drawn and quartered. We were like in first grade. We didn't know what quartered meant, or drawn, but, and then was, the nun had no problem telling us, ropes were tied to our hands and legs, and they were told to run in different directions. And so soon we started to realize that this idea of the body being under assault as part of the way of earning that kind of redemption was part of it. So I think I'm always interested in that conflict between what we think of perhaps as a kind of impulse toward understanding the universe through a kind of system versus what we give up for it, or the sort of things we don't realize maybe we're enduring or accepting as we do it. So I'm sort of interested in that as a psychological drama for a character, and because I'm really interested in sort of that interiority, I find it something that's kind of rich to delve into a little bit. So I wanted to sort of play with that a little bit in the piece. Thanks. I may have just scared everybody into
I guess I'm really interested in the way that you're able to grasp such a complete interiority in the characters. So I guess my question is whether or not your characters often begin as extensions of yourself, or there's something that you kind of do independently.
I don't know why I feel so among friends here, because none of you are really talking to me. Your eyes look down every time I'm trying to make that point. But I will say that that's such a smart and sweet question that I'm going to be honest. Yeah, I would say that the idea of any relationship between the author and the characters is probably, for me at least, legitimate. That is to say, the thoughts that I may never express to anyone, that we all have, can be fun to trot out a little bit and sort of put them on stage and you're writing and sort of see what happens. But I take the compliment from you saying the interiority I achieved, because I definitely, even reading it now, I was thinking of a few, I even edited a couple of little moments there because I thought and I think the effort is always how much can I actually do that? And I always start way too inside. So early readers of this went, I don't know what's going on, truly. And if you did understand what was going on, it's only because of some really good, helpful readers that I had. And what that revision work was about was actually bringing out the exterior world, so that there could be enough guideposts for the reader to sort of feel she's inside while seeing what the character is seeing and understanding the situation, that he doesn't feel the need to actually explain, right, without explaining so much, but sort of dramatizing it. But it's tough when it's a monologue because you're not going to have a lot of scenes. So like, for instance, the scene with the cops came later. There was always the sense that there was a legal issue at stake, but by pulling that little moment out, that little mini scene in, pulling it in, using it, I think, helped me to feel like I was getting closer to what you called, achieving some interiority. But yeah, I would say the inner voice that I grapple with is one that I do try to rely on a little bit for a character.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good question. James, please.
I was curious, you've obviously been published in a lot of literary magazines, and just from my point of view, just get into this. I'm really curious on how one gets their work to those journals, and how much is it you just sort of like sending yourself out and hoping they pick it out of the stack, and how much of it is networking and meeting people face to face, and that whole. If you could maybe discuss how that whole element works as well.
That's a huge part of it, and I'm sincere. It's going to sound like a lot of ass kissing, but the Professor Robert Lopez thing to your rear is a guy I often talk to about this stuff, because I think some writers do it better than others. And one of the things, and I'm not going to totally grovel with Rob here, but he's a buddy of mine. I would say that the thing that to just start the answer, because we have a lot of time here, I think. One of the things that impressed me about Rob is that he didn't do it with a hell of a lot of social media, which is another way, obviously, writers can start to do that, and that's a new debate about how much time should a writer devote to that kind of thing. But in the old days, it certainly was true that I was sending stuff out. And then at some point, the professional associations like the AWP, places where writers come together and editors come together, readings, and just getting to know faculty members that we might be working with as a student, friends of theirs that they might be, sort of just keeping your eyes open for those moments when you can meet people. And so, you know, even, a story of mine called Umheimush, Rob was a reader for me before, and I remember at some point saying, where do you think I should send this? And he's like, you know, I think this would be a good one for you. And that kind of help is invaluable. So I think it's true that you really want to. It's hard for me to say this because I'm also a little shy and a little sort of, a little bit of a recluse, so I don't do as much as I should, so I tend to be very grateful when I've met the right person who puts me in touch with another right person. So it's a little bit of networking, but yeah, in the old days I was sending stuff out. I mean, my first stuff that I published was in '92, I won a poetry contest. And the early stuff I sent out was poetry. And that was easier to get published. For one reason, it doesn't take up as much space. And also, I was always writing poetry that I think was like prosy. That is to say, where now I would have punctuation and sort of syntactic units in a sentence, were just line breaks. And I would read it sort of the way I read it now, but it was much shorter stuff, and it was much easier to get that published. And once you had a few behind you, once you had a few that you could write in the old days in a cover letter and say, I've been published here and here, it gets easier and easier. But maybe all I'm saying to you is it's a process where part of the time you're doing the work on your writing, the other time you're trying to think about how to get it out there. What's the best way to do it? It might be social media for some folks, it might be just getting out there and meeting people at readings and events. Good question.
How much of the time that you spend on a piece is spent in drafting and how much in revision?
A lot, seriously a lot. Really a lot. And then I'd just say to break the process down as easily for your answer as possible. It starts with a lot of some line, something, right? So rarely do I think I'm going to have a guy who's this and it's going to go here. Obviously, much writing is discovered. But with this kind of stuff, it's a little bit more like I go and I go and I go, and then there's a bump. It feels like a speed bump when you're driving along happily and it's boom. And that's when I really know there's something wrong. And it could be that I've taken a wrong turn to continue the driving. And I'm going in a wrong direction. There's a lot of stuff in this that I cut out. Lots. All of the stuff I do, whether it's book review, it's always 5 times longer than whatever ends up being published, truly. Like the stuff for the Times is generally 1,000 words, 900 words. Those are always like 4,000 word reviews. And I end up being really bummed that I have to cut stuff. And I even always write a little, hey, I've got some more. If you want me to go further with this, that's okay. But to get the stuff that I need, I do have to go there. So a lot of times there's a weird, perverse pleasure in like highlighting a block of text and just deleting it and realizing that it just gets so much tighter and so much better once that stuff that's 10 lines down comes up to meet the other line. And you realize, oh my God, that speed bump is gone. Now you can read from the beginning to past that, and it goes. And I kind of wait for the next speed bump. But obviously that's later, right? So I've drafted, I've composed, I sort of come back and forth to the desk, you know, over a period of time. At some point, I think I know it's done, and then that's when that speed bump starts. I read it, I read it, I read it, I read it. And then the next stage is sending it to friends. Because it's invariably true in my case, and it's always the truth pretty much in my life. You may even notice it here, I'm writing a book for a joke, where I think I've said something, or I feel like you're getting the joke, and I'm doing something, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, and it really happens to me a lot, where are you talking? And when that happens in a story, I'm really grateful when a reader says, I'm not sure what's happening. That one is a great example of it. I was trying to be, it's too much subtlety, I thought, you know, it's going to be very, you know, thinking of Rogrier, when we used to read Rogrier, and some stuff I had to read over and over, or like that corn cob scene in Sanctuary, you know, by Faulkner, where what is going on here? With a breastfeeding scene in Song of Solomon, we're reading it over and over. Is she really doing that? You know, because it's so subtly drawn, these things, and I'm too subtle sometimes, so yeah. I always have to go back and make sure the reader is actually getting enough of what I'm trying to get out.
Joe,
Yeah.
unless I don't want to take up the time, but for the students, but I have sort of two questions. One, just a venal business question that came up as you were talking about you're writing your book review. So do they pay you by the review or by the word?
By the review.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
How much is the review? I mean,
Yeah.
is that I feel like, you know, these guys have no idea. Like,
It's
how much
very
does
generous,
a book reviewer
whatever.
get?
I'm so happy. It's not much. I mean, I mean, I think
You don't have to
generally
give us an exact
it's a
number.
few.
It's a few.
It's a few hundred for a good sized review. You know, I never know. I'm a freelancer with the Times, you know, so I mean, I have been lucky. I've reviewed close to 30 books for them, but either they'll accept a pitch from me, or I'm grateful to get a pitch from them.
Right.
And I will say this: if you guys are thinking about going even further than just writing and publishing, but teaching too, much of it depends on what you publish. And so I'm grateful to have a relationship with the New York Times, not just ass-kissing-wise. I mean, it's a place that takes books seriously. And where else does a book depend for its introduction to the world but there? And so it is a kind of privilege to do it. So the money is part of it for sure, but it certainly doesn't pay my rent. You know? So it's nice to kind of know that the time I spent at the desk is respected by them, and I'm grateful for that. But it's not a lot.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Did you have a second one?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Then the second one is more abstract. I'm not sure how to say it. So, like, I remember in grad school when we were in grad school, I was trying to write these stories, and often my narrators were these very unsavory people, and they would
I remember your work. Yeah.
talk, and they would have other sort of marginalized, people who were very other than me, not at all my experience, and they would talk, and I would get some pushback on that from professors, from my classmates. You know, you got to be careful doing those voices. You've got to be, you could offend, watch your step there. And I was thinking about that, especially the last story you read, and how, the sort of the racial epithet and the colloquial language, and how much do you think about that? How much do you worry about it? Are you actually drawn to go there?
Right.
Is it does it feel like a risk? Does it feel like something you have to do? Is it something that scares you? Do you get pushback?
Yeah. I truly think that's, I really appreciate that question. Because that story's so new, it came, so the magazine is Epiphany, and the theme of the issue is risky words, I believe. So that was a good home for that story for that reason. And the racial stuff, I wrote it way before the Ferguson stuff, and I'm not saying there's any sort of, but there's a whiff, I guess, in there a little bit. I am not afraid to do that in the sense that, writing about body parts and writing about relationships and stuff like that, to me feels like the joy of it. Otherwise, I'm not very good at, there was a taxi cab in the corner and she was wondering whether he would step away and let her step. Those scenes are harder for me. Managing the pacing and the stage setting of those kinds of realistic scenes are harder for me. That's why I have great respect for them. But the stuff I'm interested in, I think, it's hard to say. I'm not interested in transgressive work, sort of, period. I mean, whatever sort of works. I think stuff can be transgressive when it's deeply honest and kind of raw. But the thing with the racial stuff was just that my cousin's a prison guard at a maximum security prison in Massachusetts, and like I have an uncle who's a cop, and dad's a firefighter, so I grew up with a lot of civil servants and stuff. And I am sort of interested in the way people's righteous indignation kind of rises up and takes over the way they sort of view the world, whether it's a defense or whether it's almost a high. And the way I think this guy's working with those kind of things, I didn't want to have a scene where he just like called the guy a name. It was more, he almost was, not so much fetishizing, but getting off on the kind of rhyme of nigger pig, you know, that was for him, not for me. But for me, once I sort of found a little bit of that and the sort of the bounces of like South Carolina nigger pig, once I got that, I was like, this is the way this guy sleeps at night. This helps him to kind of see the world in a way that's melodious. These words rhyme because they should go together. I'm not explaining this well and probably offending people, but I don't mean to, and I'm not standing by any sort of racist bullshit. It's simply that this character's voice, this character's problems are many. It's not just this thing, and trying to evoke that with one person's voice without telling, but sort of trying to dramatize it in his words, seemed the only way to do it. But you know, I have a story in here, if anybody read Man on a Couch, which is pretty much the opposite, where it's like everything this guy does, I just had to shut down and do the opposite. The guy in that story doesn't want to talk about who he is, doesn't want to talk about what he's dealing with, and trying to get that stuff to ooze out of the sides of his sentences was harder and also just equally as interesting in the effort. But nothing is interesting to me about blatant evil or blatant, you know, some sort of black and white character or, you know, one-dimensional character. And so I definitely, you know, that stuff wasn't even there either at the beginning. Like I said, the cops came later, so that wasn't there. But when I thought about what would a white guy from South Carolina be, what would really get him pissed? You know, what would that scene look like? Besides, he's been found out for being what he is. Perhaps there, it would be a black cop and a white cop that would come in, and maybe that would amp up the drama. And to that end, I have to be honest with the way he would see that scene. And that's it. And I would say that I don't, as much as I'm not afraid to do that in the writing, I like a world where people feel safe and feel happy. I know it's not our world, but I don't want to contribute to the feelings of unsafety, and I mean that. So it's not my intention to put work out to provoke and to force something in your face, because you need it forced in your face, not at all. But getting to that place with that character is simply inevitable finally, it seems to me. And who knows, if I were to continue writing, maybe other stuff would happen, and then I'd have to figure out, is this there? Why am I putting it there?
That's a really good answer. Okay. Any last questions?
Any last questions, or are we?
Yeah, if I could just kind of bounce up with
Sure.
what you were saying there. In those situations, do you sort of just kind of trust your own kind of creative gut in those situations, or do you have to maybe like workshop it with certain friends or colleagues where you're like, is this too much? Is this going to come off as
Definitely.
like maybe shock value or something? Like, is that
Definitely.
Maybe tell us maybe something about that?
Late Thaw is a good example. Like when I was writing that one, I took a sabbatical in 2007, moved out of New York, ended a relationship, totally pulled up stakes from New York and went back to Boston, lived with my mother. My mother was elderly at the time, not in great health, but totally clear mentally. She, in her heyday, read sometimes a book a day, not War and Peace, but she read a lot, and always library books around and things she was in and out of. And so, and my sister reads a lot, but she reads a lot of stuff that I don't read. But there are different readers I go to for different things. Some of them do the same story, so sometimes I gotta work out something that I know Lopez will help me with. I know I'll get it somewhere, and then at some point, and that may come first and that may come second, but anyway, with Late Thaw, I remember reading that to my mother. Came down, I used to make breakfast every day, I'd make a big pot of coffee, and I'd go and write. And I came down one day and said, can I just read this to you? And when I was done, she was like, well, we'll just leave it here and let me look at it again, because I didn't give it to her. And later she had some really good stuff. And I also wanted my sister to read that because both of them they're more interested in stories where characters are discernible and there's something that they can sort of identify with, which I know that feeling well too, but I couldn't see it at that stage. And so I wanted their feedback. And I also wanted that story to have a little bit more heart. and I wanted readers who kind of look for heart in stories. And so if they felt it was too this or too that, I would take note of that. And but this gut thing you're talking about, I think in the end that's the challenge is because when I give it to somebody in my gut, I think it's done to some extent. I'm open for criticism, but I don't know what else to do with it. So my gut kind of turns off. So if somebody can get that opened again, that's when I think, great, lucky for me, I can go back and I've figured something out and learning something in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.